Story 1. I'll never forget that night. It was one of those evenings where everything was quiet, the kind where you could almost hear the silence. My wife and I were sitting on the couch in the living room, just relaxing after a long day. The kids were already in bed, and the dogs were sprawled out on the floor, acting like they couldn't be bothered with anything. I remember that night so clearly because it was supposed to be just another normal night, but it wasn't. We had 3 dogs at the time: a German Shepherd, a scrappy terrier, and a mutt that mostly kept to himself. The Shepherd, though, she was always on high alert. She'd bark at the slightest sound, which normally made me laugh. But tonight, she was different. She was dead still, sitting by the doorway with her ears up. The terrier was next to her, but unlike the Shepherd, he wasn't staring at the door. He was staring down the hallway, at nothing. His body was rigid, eyes wide, ears flat against his head. I wasn't really paying attention at first, thinking they just heard something outside, maybe a car or a neighbor. But then the Shepherd's growl cut through the air. Low, constant, like she was warning someone or something. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I glanced over at my wife. She caught my eye and we both shifted uneasily. "What's going on with them?" she asked, her voice tight. I shook my head. "I don't know, they're acting weird." Then it happened. The terrier's growl joined the Shepherd's, but now it wasn't just a growl. It was a snarl, a deep, guttural sound that made my stomach drop. He wasn't even looking at the door anymore. His focus was fixed down the hallway, right in front of the bedroom door, where the light switch was. I leaned forward, straining my eyes to see if there was something, anything, down the hall. But the only thing I saw was the dark, empty hallway. I stood up and turned around, trying to figure out what they were looking at. The hallway was pitch black. There was no sound, no movement, nothing out of the ordinary. But the dogs? They were still staring, growling louder now, their bodies tense. My heart began to race, my mind starting to spin with confusion and anxiety. "Hey guys, calm down," I said, trying to ease the tension. I walked over to the hallway, half expecting to find something that would explain their behavior. A shadow, a draft, maybe a loose door. But the air felt still, too still. I switched on the hallway light. Nothing. Just a normal hallway, with nothing but a few framed pictures on the wall and a coat rack. I turned back to the living room. "I don't see anything," I told my wife. But her face was pale now. She was looking at the dogs. Then it happened again. The Shepherd's growl went from low to frantic, and the terrier started barking. At first, it was just a couple of barks, but then it escalated, wild and panicked. My wife looked up at me, her eyes wide with fear. "What the hell's going on?" I swallowed hard. I was about to tell her that it was probably nothing, that maybe the dogs were just on edge. But then I saw it, the light switch, on the wall near the bedroom. It flicked. It didn't just turn on. It was as if someone had physically turned it on. I'm telling you, there was no one there. We were the only ones in the house. And that light shouldn't have moved. But it did. The dogs went absolutely insane. The Shepherd was barking so loudly I thought she might break the windows. The terrier was sprinting around in circles, frantically trying to climb the walls. They were both wild-eyed, their bodies shaking. My heart pounded in my chest, and for the first time in my life, I was genuinely scared. I was frozen. My wife stood up too, her hands shaking as she reached for mine. "What do we do?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't know. What could I say? I had no explanation for what was happening. All I knew was that something was wrong. Something was in that hallway with us, and it wasn't good. We didn't stay there long after that. My wife grabbed the kids, and I didn't waste a second. I rushed them out of the house, my mind racing. I wasn't sure what I thought was going to happen, but I knew we weren't safe in there anymore. The dogs were still barking as we walked out the door. They didn't stop, not even when we were outside standing on the front lawn. My wife and I didn't speak for a while. Neither of us wanted to. We didn't need to. We both felt it. We stayed outside in the cold for what felt like hours, watching the house. The dogs eventually calmed down, but we didn't go back inside that night. We didn't go back inside for a long time after that. The next morning I went back in, carefully checking the hallway again. looking for something, anything that could explain what had happened. But everything was normal. The light switch was in the same position, the hallway was still dark, and there was nothing out of place. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been in that house with us. Something that we couldn't see but could feel. Something that had turned that light on, and something that made the dogs act the way they did. I still don't know what it was, but I can't ever forget it. I don't know if I ever will. Story 2, I used to work as a manager in a computer repair shop a couple of years ago. It wasn't exactly glamorous, but it paid the bills. Most of my days were filled with routine, filling out paperwork, handling customer complaints, running diagnostics. You know, the usual. But there was this one day, one thing that happened that stayed with me ever since. It's been years and I can't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I remember it was early in the morning. I was in the back of the shop, the usual dull buzz of the fluorescent lights overhead the only sound. The shop was quiet, barely any customers at that hour. I had a client's computer on one of the workstations. The thing was running a series of virus scans and malware checks. I didn't think much of it. It was a standard procedure. I was just sitting at the desk, doing some paperwork, glancing at the screen every so often to make sure everything was running smoothly. The screensaver on the computer kicked in after a while. It was set to show random pictures from the user's My Pictures folder. Family photos mostly, some kids at a birthday party, a wedding, some vacation shots, normal stuff. I barely even looked at it. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I swear I saw something that stopped me dead in my tracks. I didn't want to believe it at first. I figured I was just tired. Maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me. But then I looked again, and there it was. The photo was like the others at first, a woman from the shoulders up. She looked like she was in a living room or something, but there was something wrong, something off. The woman's neck. I saw it clear as day. Her throat was slit wide open. The blood was dark, almost black, dripping down her shirt. The whole thing looked like a crime scene photo. I could feel my stomach churn, a cold sweat creeping up my back. I blinked, rubbed my eyes. My heart was hammering in my chest. But when I looked again, the photo was gone. The screen was back to the car show photos. Bright, colorful, totally normal. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe it was some weird glitch, a virus or something. I mean, who knows what kind of malware was running on that computer, right? But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I tried to push it out of my head and went back to my paperwork, but every few minutes my eyes would drift back to the screen. I kept expecting to see that photo again, but it didn't come back. Still, I felt like the air in the room had changed, like something was just off. I didn't say anything to the other guys in the shop. What could I say? Hey, I think I saw a murder victim on a client's computer screen. They'd probably think I was losing it, so I kept it to myself, chalking it up to my imagination. The day went on. I went about my business, fixing other computers, answering phones, dealing with whatever came my way. But I couldn't focus. The image of that woman with her throat cut kept creeping into my thoughts. It was almost like the picture was burned into my brain. It was vivid, too vivid. Then around midday, I had to bring another customer's PC into the back. I was carrying it, my mind still partly preoccupied with the strange image from earlier. I set the computer down on the workbench and turned around to grab something from the shelf. And that's when I saw it again. This time, in the corner of my eye, just like before. At first, I didn't really process it, but then it hit me and I froze. The peripheral vision, you know, how you catch something in your side view. I saw the trunk of a car, and inside, no, I wasn't imagining it. I saw a body. It was bound, arms and legs tied up with rope. Blood was pooling around it, dark and thick. There was no mistaking it. It looked real. Too real. The sight of it made my stomach lurch. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I turned around fast, telling myself it was just a trick of the light, that maybe the computer screen was malfunctioning again. But when I looked back, it was gone. The screen was back to normal. Some guy in a racing car, just some random shot from a car show. I don't know why, but my hands were shaking. My skin was cold. It was like I could still feel the weight of that image in my mind, like I could still see that bloody body in the trunk, even though I knew it wasn't there anymore. I did my best to push it out of my mind, tried to keep working, but it was impossible. My thoughts kept drifting back to that computer, to the woman with her throat cut, to the body in the trunk. I kept telling myself that it was just a glitch, that maybe the scans weren't as thorough as they should have been, or that there was some kind of corrupted file. But the more I tried to rationalize it, the more I realized how impossible that seemed. I mean, how do you explain something like that? A photo of a murdered woman? A bloody body in a car trunk? It didn't make sense. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't want to sound crazy. It was just me, alone in the back of that shop, with those images in my head. I don't know what happened with that computer after that, but I'm glad I never had to work on it again. A few days later, the client picked it up. I didn't say anything to him. He didn't ask. He probably didn't even notice that anything was wrong with it, but I can't forget what I saw. It's like those images are burned into my mind, and no matter how hard I try to shake them, they're always there, lurking. Story 3. I was 17, sitting alone in my bedroom, crying my eyes out. It was one of those nights where everything seemed to hit at once. The weight of home, school, and everything in between felt like too much to carry. My parents were downstairs, but they were busy with whatever they did, and the only phone in the house was in the living room. I couldn't call anyone, couldn't reach out, and I felt trapped in the silence of my room, just crying and wishing for something, anything to make it stop. I wasn't praying really, just mentally screaming into the void. I don't know why, but I needed help, needed someone to understand how badly I was struggling. The room felt smaller than usual, like it was closing in on me. The walls seemed to be pressing against me, and the silence was suffocating. I just wanted to escape, to talk to someone who could listen, but I knew I couldn't leave this room. I kept telling myself to pull it together, to stop being so weak, but everything felt like too much. The loneliness was overwhelming, the emptiness suffocating. I was fighting the urge to give up on everything. My mind was a whirlwind of negative thoughts, spiraling deeper and deeper into a place I didn't want to be. And then it happened. I was sitting with my back to the chest of drawers, the one that always felt too close to me. The air in the room felt thick, like I couldn't breathe properly. I wiped my eyes, sniffling, trying to pull myself together. That's when I felt it. At first, it was just a subtle sensation, like someone was standing behind me. I didn't think much of it. Maybe it was just the weight of my emotions, the tension in the room. But then it got stronger. It felt like something was pressing down on my left shoulder. Not a tap or a brush, but a firm, deliberate weight, like someone had placed their hand there. I froze. I could feel the heat of it, the warmth of the palm pressing down, and the sensation of individual fingers gripping my shoulder. It wasn't soft or gentle. It was heavy. It felt real, like someone was standing right there, behind me, resting their hand on me. I could even feel the outline of each finger and the warmth radiating from it. My heart started racing. I couldn't move. My body felt like it was frozen in place. My muscles locked. The weight of the hand on my shoulder felt like it was pulling me down, anchoring me to the spot, and I could hear my breath coming faster, shallow, panicked. There was no one in the room with me. I knew that. I'd been alone the entire time. There was no one behind me, no one there at all, but the hand was there, undeniable, pressing into my shoulder. The longer it stayed, the more intense the sensation became. The warmth spread through my skin, like it was burning into me. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. I was too terrified to even move. And then the grip tightened. The fingers dug into my skin, like they were digging into the fabric of my soul. I could feel it, each finger pressing in, each one holding me down. And the heat, oh God, the heat, it was suffocating. It felt like it was seeping into my bones, into my very chest. My heart pounded, and I felt a cold sweat break out across my back. It was as though the warmth wasn't just physical, it was something else, something dark, something unnatural. In that moment, I didn't even know what I was feeling. Fear, panic, dread. It was all of it, all at once, and then some. The silence of the room was deafening, and the sensation on my shoulder grew stronger, more insistent. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't move. The weight of the hand, no, the thing, holding me down was too much. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to get out of that room, away from whatever was behind me. But I couldn't move. I just sat there, paralyzed, unable to tear myself away from the grip on my shoulder. And then, without warning, it was gone. Just like that. The heat disappeared. The hand was no longer there, and I was left sitting in the dead silence, my body trembling uncontrollably. I couldn't even process what had just happened. I didn't know what it was or who it was, but I knew one thing for sure: it wasn't human. I didn't even wait a second. I got up so fast that I knocked over the chair next to me, and I rushed downstairs without looking back. I didn't care if anyone saw me, tears streaming down my face, shaking uncontrollably. I didn't care. I just needed to get away from that room. I ran to my parents, but I didn't say a word. How could I? What could I even say? I still don't know what it was, what happened that night. I don't know if it was just my mind playing tricks on me or something else entirely, but whatever it was, I couldn't forget it. The weight of that hand on my shoulder, the warmth, the fingers, the grip. I still feel it sometimes, even now. I never went back into that room alone after that, and to this day, I can't explain it. All I know is that something was there, something I can't explain, and it scared me more than anything ever has. Story 4. It was around 10 p.m. when I set off to pick up my friend from the airport. He'd been away for a few weeks, and his girlfriend, who was with me, was desperate to see him. I had the directions pulled up on my phone, so I wasn't really paying attention to the route, just following the blinking blue dot that Apple Maps kept updating. The road was dark, like pitch black dark. We were way out in the sticks with nothing but trees lining the road. There weren't any streetlights, and I could barely make out the edges of the road. I don't think I'd ever driven this way before, but it didn't really hit me until we came up next to the train. I first noticed the headlights from the train pulling up beside us, almost like it was keeping pace with the car. I thought it was just passing us, but nope, the damn thing matched our speed exactly. It was on the other side of the road, so the right side of my car was completely blocked off. No view, just the sound of the train wheels and that endless screeching noise. "Is this normal?" my friend's girlfriend asked. I didn't have an answer for her. I wasn't sure if it was normal or not, but I kept driving, and after a while I noticed the train had been with us for a while now. I figured it would end soon, but the damn thing just kept going. "Where the hell are we?" she muttered under her breath, looking out the window. To be honest, I wasn't really sure. The road felt like it was going on forever. It was weird too. The air felt heavy, like something was pressing in on us. It wasn't until we hit a train yard that I realized things were getting a little weird. We came around a bend, and there it was, a massive old train yard to our left. The tracks were rusted, and the whole place had that eerie, abandoned feeling to it, just like some scene from a horror movie. It didn't help that the whole yard was shrouded in shadow, like the lights were turned off just to add to the tension. We kept driving past, the train still alongside us, and I swear it felt like we were moving through some kind of nightmare. I looked over at my friend's girlfriend, and she was clutching the seat. "This is messed up," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I tried to joke about it. "Maybe we're in some parallel universe," I said, but my voice sounded more nervous than I intended. The train and yard just didn't end. It went on and on, stretching out as far as I could see. I felt like we were stuck in this loop, moving but never going anywhere. 10 minutes at least we were on that road, with the train to our right and the yard on the left. I didn't know how it was still there. How could it not end? How could it keep going like that? Eventually, the train seemed to lose speed, and we pulled away from it, the train still trailing behind us. The road finally cleared up ahead, and I saw the lights of the airport in the distance. We picked up my friend without a problem. He was excited to see us, and we were eager to tell him about the strange, creepy drive we'd had. We got back in the car and headed down the same road. The excitement of showing him the train yard got me talking. "You won't believe it, man. It was like something straight out of a horror movie. This train just kept going with us for like 10 minutes. I laughed, but it didn't come out quite right. We hit the stretch of road where the train yard should have been. I was ready to show him, to prove how freaky it looked in the dark. But when we passed the spot where it had been before, nothing. There was no train yard, no train, not a damn thing. The tracks were still there, sure, but no trains, no buildings, no rusted cars, nothing. I slammed on the brakes and my friend's girlfriend let out a terrified gasp. "What the hell?" she whispered, her voice shaking. I stared at the empty stretch of road, and we went over it again just to make sure. But nothing. The train yard, the train, we had just driven through it. And now it was gone, like it had never been there at all. "Are we going crazy?" my friend's girlfriend asked, her voice a mix of disbelief and panic. She kept looking out the window, expecting it to just pop up again. "I swear we just saw it. It was right there." I was freaking out now too. "I know, I saw it too. It was right there. How is this possible?" I could barely get the words out. We turned the car around and drove along the road for what felt like forever. We kept driving, hoping the yard would show up again. Maybe we had missed it, but the farther we went, the more I realized. It wasn't there. It was gone. No train yard, no train. Nothing but empty, dark roads and trees. "Something's not right," my friend's girlfriend said, her voice breaking. I wanted to say something, anything that made sense, but nothing came to mind. I kept driving, my hands tight on the wheel, my heart pounding. We were all quiet now, the only sound the hum of the engine and the tires on the road. I remember feeling like we'd crossed some kind of line, like we'd passed through something we weren't supposed to, and now we couldn't go back. The rest of the drive felt like a blur. It was like I was in a daze, just trying to get out of that place. We didn't talk much after that. We didn't need to. What could we say? There was no explanation for what happened. Nothing made sense. It was like we had driven through some space that didn't belong to us, and now we couldn't find our way back. It was the longest, most unsettling drive I'd ever made. And when we finally got back, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The whole experience just felt wrong. We didn't talk about it much after that, but we never forgot. Not even now. Story 5. We lived in this house a few years ago, not too far from where I am now. It was one of those older places, nothing too fancy, but decent. I remember when we first moved in, we found ourselves brushing off little things that seemed off. Things would disappear, like pens, keys, or a shoe here and there. But it was always the little things, nothing you'd really miss unless you were actively looking for them. My mom would ask if I'd seen her favorite lipstick, or if anyone had moved a book she'd been reading. Then a couple of days later, it'd show up, usually in a place that just didn't make sense. At first, we didn't think much of it. I figured I was just absent-minded, or my sister was borrowing things and forgetting. Mom always blamed the dog for moving things, even though he was the most chill animal you could imagine. But as time went on, we stopped mentioning it to each other. It was small stuff, so we didn't think there was any reason to worry. One day, though, my mom lost one of her favorite earrings. They were these dangly silver ones, delicate but not too expensive. She wore them all the time, and she was really upset when one of them went missing. She tore apart the whole house looking for it, but it was like it had just vanished. She told me about it a few times over the next few days, her frustration building. "I swear, it was just here," she'd say. "I put it on the counter, and now it's gone." We figured maybe it had turned up after a few days or so, but it didn't. It wasn't until about a month later that something happened that made us both pause. I had just gotten back from a late shift at work. It was around 10:30 at night, and the house was quieter than usual. The only light on was the one in the kitchen. I walked down the hall and stopped dead in my tracks. Right there in the middle of the floor at the end of the hallway was the missing earring. It wasn't just laying there haphazardly either. It was perfectly positioned, almost like someone had placed it there. Right in the center of the hallway, at the very end, near the 3 doors that led to the kitchen, the bathroom, and my mom's room. No way could it have just fallen there. There was no reason for it to be there at all. I froze. The earring shone in the dim light, almost too perfectly. I picked it up carefully, my heart racing. I wasn't sure what to think. It felt like, I don't know, like someone had been watching me. like I wasn't alone in the house. But I just shook it off, telling myself it was just a coincidence. I snapped a quick photo of it, almost instinctively, before I grabbed it and went to my mom's room. "Hey, look what I found," I said, trying to make it sound casual. She was lying on the bed, flipping through a book, her face lighting up when I handed it to her. "Oh my God," she said, almost sounding relieved. "Where the hell did you find this?" She took it from me, studying it in her hands like it was a treasure. "Right at the end of the hallway," I replied, a little confused myself. "Just sitting there, perfectly placed. No idea how it got there." We both stared at the earring for a moment, a kind of uneasy silence hanging between us. I didn't want to say it out loud, but the first thing that came to mind was, how the hell had it gotten there? We were both sure that it wasn't anywhere near the hallway the last time we saw it. I mean, who just leaves an earring in the middle of the floor? Mom shrugged it off at first, but there was something in her eyes. She was thinking the same thing I was. We both had that same unsettling feeling, the one that crept in when something didn't add up, but we didn't say anything else. I went back to my room, trying to push it from my mind. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that damn earring, the way it had been laid out so perfectly. I couldn't get the image out of my head. I kept telling myself I was being paranoid, but it felt wrong. The way it had been placed, like someone had been there watching me. The next morning, Mom and I didn't really talk much about it. I think we were both too freaked out to really say anything, but we couldn't avoid the weirdness of it. We both knew something was off. We couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had caused things to go missing in the house wasn't just a trick of the mind anymore. It felt intentional. A couple of days later, I woke up late for work. As I rushed to grab my things, I noticed something else, a piece of paper crumpled up and tucked under the corner of the couch. I bent down to pick it up. It wasn't a grocery list or anything mundane like that. It was just a single word scrawled in dark ink. Watching. I didn't even have to think about it. I went straight to Mom's room. "Look at this," I said, holding out the paper. Her face went pale when she read it. "I don't like this," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Neither of us could explain it. The oddities, the feeling of being watched. It wasn't just the earring anymore. It was like the house was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I tried to go back to normal after that, but every time I walked down that hallway, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was just out of sight, lurking around the corner. The air felt thick, and I hated being alone in the house. I felt like something, or someone, was always just behind me. We moved out a few months later. Story 6, I was about 15, sitting in the living room of my neighbor's house, babysitting their daughter. It was a typical night. The house wasn't anything special, old, creaky, but nothing about it ever struck me as creepy. Not like some of the other houses in the neighborhood. But then again, it was just another stop in my babysitting gig. The dog, a rat terrier with a bark that could pierce your eardrums, was a different story. That dog barked at everything. The wind, the mailman, leaves blowing by the window. It didn't matter. She was always on edge. But tonight, something felt different. The girl I was babysitting had gone to bed not long ago. She was a quiet kid, nothing to worry about. I was sitting on the couch, zoning out while flipping through the TV channels, trying to kill time until her parents came home. The house was still like it usually was at night, but then the dog started acting weird. At first she barked, but this time it wasn't at the door like usual. She ran into the corner of the room and just stared, barking wildly, her body rigid. I froze. My eyes went to the corner she was focused on, but all I could see was the same wallpapered corner I'd passed by 100 times before. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound. Just the dog, barking like it had lost its mind. I stood up, thinking it was just being its usual obnoxious self. But the dog didn't stop. It ran into the hallway and then to the other side of the living room, stopping to bark at something invisible in the corner of that room. My skin prickled, and I felt a knot in my stomach. I wasn't scared. I didn't believe in any of that ghost stuff, but something about this felt wrong. The barking was more frantic now, more urgent. "Shut up, damn it," I muttered under my breath, not wanting to wake the girl. I grabbed a blanket from the couch, half-heartedly trying to calm the dog down by rubbing its back, but it didn't stop. It ran into the kitchen next, barking nonstop. The sound was sharp and maddening. "Hey, knock it off!" I shouted, not knowing what else to do. I didn't care about the dog anymore. I was just trying to get it to stop before the girl woke up. When I reached the kitchen, I was hit with something I couldn't explain. Every single cabinet door in the kitchen was wide open. Every one. I froze in the doorway, staring at the scene, unable to make sense of it. The dishes were still in their places. Nothing had been taken out, but the cabinets, they were open. All of them. My heart was pounding in my chest, and a chill crawled up my spine. It wasn't just weird, it was impossible. I was the only one there, and I hadn't even moved from the living room a minute ago. How the hell could all those doors be open? I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up, and I didn't even think twice. I grabbed the dog, practically yanking her out of the kitchen and back into the living room. The dog stopped barking immediately, like it had just been waiting for someone else to get out of that kitchen. I stood there, breathing heavy, staring at the dog, my hands shaking. I didn't know what to make of it, but I wasn't going back in there. Not then, not ever. When I heard the door open a few minutes later, I couldn't have been more relieved. The dad was home. He walked in, giving me a polite smile. "Hey, everything good?" I didn't know what to say. What was I supposed to tell him? That the dog had been barking at something invisible, and when I checked the kitchen, all the cabinet doors were open? He'd laugh, think I was just overreacting. It was crazy, even to me. "Yeah, everything's fine," I said, forcing a smile. Just the dog. I'll head out now." I didn't even bother explaining. I wasn't sticking around for another minute. I didn't go back to that house. Not after that night. Not even once. I still don't know what happened in that kitchen. Maybe I was just tired, or maybe I was imagining things. But that wasn't the only thing that bothered me. It was the feeling. The heavy, suffocating feeling I got the moment I stepped into that kitchen. Like I wasn't alone. Like something had been there watching me. I never told anyone what happened. My parents would have just brushed it off. They wouldn't have believed me. No one would. But I'll never forget it. Never forget the feeling of standing in that kitchen, staring at those open cabinets, and knowing there was something I couldn't see, but could feel. Story 7. It was the weirdest thing that ever happened to me and my boyfriend. I'll try to tell you the whole thing, but I'm still not sure if I believe it myself. I can't even explain how it started. So we were at home, just a typical Saturday night. We'd been hanging out, watching TV, laughing, doing our usual thing. We had an early night, you know? Not that it matters. We went to bed like we always do. No different than any other night. But then I woke up, suddenly. It wasn't like I was slowly coming to. It was more like I'd been shocked awake. I sat up in the dark, my heart pounding. I didn't even know why, but then I realized something. I wasn't in bed. I was on the floor. My body was drenched in sweat, my clothes sticking to my skin, but I wasn't sure how or why I ended up there. I turned around. My boyfriend wasn't beside me. I panicked. I called his name, but my voice sounded weak, hoarse, almost like I didn't have the strength to yell. "Mike?" I whispered, my throat dry. I pulled myself up to my feet, and that's when I saw it. The bed was empty, just like I feared. But something felt wrong, something I couldn't put my finger on. "Mike?" I tried again, this time louder. Then I heard him. "Amber, what the hell?" He was on the other side of the room. He sounded disoriented like me. I couldn't see him at first, but I could hear him moving around in the dark, his voice strained. Then I heard him stumble, crash into something, probably the dresser. I rushed to him, my legs shaking. "Are you okay?" I asked, but I barely recognized the sound of my own voice. It was like I wasn't fully in my body yet, like something was still holding me back. My skin felt cold and hot at the same time. He groaned, and when he spoke again, his voice was rough. "I don't know. What the hell happened? Where are we?" That's when I noticed. His clothes were gone too. He was as naked as I was, and that hit me like a ton of bricks. What the hell was going on? "Amber," he said, his voice low, almost shaking. "Where the hell are we? What happened?" I don't know." I couldn't stop looking at him, trying to figure out if this was some sick joke, but it wasn't. I felt it. Something was wrong. Something was off, and I couldn't shake it. I reached out to him, and we stood there, just staring at each other for what felt like forever. Then finally he spoke again. Did you have the dream too? The words sent a chill straight through me. I couldn't even say anything. My throat was tight, and I could feel the panic starting to rise again. How could he? How could he know? But somehow he did. I did, I whispered, barely able to get the words out. Same dream, same people. He didn't need to finish. I already knew what he was talking about. That group of people. We both had the same dream. Both of us. We didn't need to explain it to each other because we both knew. We'd been surrounded by these figures, people with pale faces, no expression, no emotion. Their eyes, I still can't describe the feeling of looking into those eyes. They were blank, empty, and their mouths, or the lack of them. They had no mouths. It was like they were just there. There were so many of them, so many of these people, surrounding us, closing in. The feeling was suffocating, like we couldn't breathe, and we couldn't talk, couldn't scream for help. It felt like we were trapped in some kind of nightmare, but we couldn't wake up. But there was more. There was something else. I still don't know what it was, but I could feel it in my gut. Something lurking behind those people, watching us even though we couldn't see it, couldn't understand what it was. It was like a presence, an overwhelming sense of dread that made everything feel wrong. I saw them too, Mike said, his voice cracking. I saw them in the hallway and I couldn't move. Amber, there were so many of them. They just kept coming, and then everything went dark. I swallowed hard. My heart was pounding again. But we were in the living room, weren't we? Not the hallway. He shook his head. We were in the living room. Same place, different dream maybe. But this feeling, it wasn't just a dream. It was real. Like they were real. I could feel them. I nodded, feeling sick. My legs felt weak beneath me as I tried to stay standing. It was the same for me. The same feeling. The same sensation of being watched. Only I didn't know where they were or what they wanted. I couldn't even think straight, and the sweat on my body started to drip down like I was burning up from the inside out. I don't get it, Mike said, his voice shaking now. Why are we here, Amber? Why are we? Before he could finish, something made my skin crawl, deep down in my bones. A low sound, a hum, almost like it was vibrating in my ears. I could feel it, I could hear it. But it wasn't coming from Mike. It wasn't coming from anything in the room. It was coming from inside my head. The hairs on my neck stood up as the room seemed to darken. The air grew heavy, thick. The hum grew louder, like 1,000 voices murmuring, but none of them made a sound. Then I heard it. Something was moving, but not with footsteps. It was sliding toward us, like it was dragging itself across the floor. Mike froze, and we both stared at the darkened doorway. Nothing was there. I don't know how, but in that moment, we both knew we had to leave. We couldn't stay another second. Neither of us could. Without saying a word, we bolted out of the room, not stopping to grab our clothes, not even looking back. Story 8. A year ago, I was living alone in a house I'd bought a few years back, a place that had more room than I needed, but a decent price for the area. I didn't have many friends, and the ones I did have didn't smoke, so there was no real reason to keep ashtrays lying around. But I'd gotten a few over the years, family gifts mostly, or little things that had come with a set of decorations. Some sat in a drawer, others were tucked away in cupboards. I don't know why, but I kept them. You never know when you might need one, I guess. One afternoon, I was digging through the kitchen cupboards looking for papers, just bills, nothing exciting, and I came across one of those ashtrays. It was an old glass one, polished and heavy, the kind with a little groove to hold a cigarette. I remember thinking it was clean, no dust, and definitely no ash. Just a leftover piece from when I had friends over who smoked. I didn't even think twice about it. I was in a rush, had work to do in the garage, so I just left the ashtray on the kitchen table and went to get the tools. The day passed and I forgot about it. I worked on the car for a while, the hum of the garage keeping me in a kind of focused zone. It was an hour or so later when I decided to head inside for a drink. I opened the door, and immediately something hit me. It was like a faint smell of cigarettes, not strong, but just there enough to make me pause. I figured I might have gotten a whiff from someone passing by outside, but then my eyes landed on the table. The ashtray was filled with cigarette ash. I froze. No one had been in the house. I hadn't had anyone over, and I sure as hell hadn't been smoking. The ashtray was empty when I left. I swear to God I checked it. I even picked it up, turned it over, checked the inside. Clean. But now it was full of ash, piled high, like someone had just put out a fresh cigarette. I stepped forward slowly, staring at it, my heart starting to pound. The ash didn't look like it had just accumulated either. It was old, but the smell, thin and faint, almost stale, lingered in the air, making my stomach churn. I picked the ashtray up cautiously, as if it might explode or something. My fingers felt cold against the glass. No cigarette butts, just ash. A mound of it. I tried to tell myself I was overreacting, but it didn't make any sense. I walked around the house, checking all the doors, all the windows. Everything was locked. Everything was just like I'd left it. But the ashtray was real, and there was no way it had filled itself. I checked the back door again, as if maybe someone had slipped in unnoticed, but there was no sign of forced entry. No footprints in the dirt. Nothing. I even checked the locks, making sure they were secure. They were. The house was still quiet, like nothing had happened. Yet something had. I stood in the kitchen for a minute, just staring at the ashtray. I felt stupid for even being this unsettled. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe someone had slipped in, but I knew that wasn't it. I didn't have anyone who'd pull something like that, and if they did, they would have left more than just ash. I picked up the phone, called my best friend, no answer. Called another one, same thing. Then I called my neighbor, a woman who lived 2 doors down. She hadn't been by. No one had come around that day, no one had seen anything unusual. I even called the people I barely talked to, just to be sure. No one had been by, so I stood there still holding the phone, staring at the ashtray. The house was completely quiet again, but the air felt different now. It felt thick, like something was just waiting in the corners. I couldn't shake the feeling, so I walked around the house again. This time my eyes went straight to the kitchen knife block. It was probably ridiculous, but I grabbed one. A stupid, small kitchen knife. I don't even know what I was planning to do with it. Maybe defend myself from a ghost, but I needed to feel like I could do something. I checked the whole damn house again, moving room to room, checking closets, checking corners. There was no one. The locks were still intact. Nothing had been touched except for the ashtray. No signs of a break-in, no strange footprints, no missing stuff. I went into the garage. It felt just as normal as it had when I left, with no one there. But I couldn't shake the thought that someone had been in here, messing with me. I threw the knife on the counter and grabbed the ashtray again. It didn't feel right, the weight of it, the smoothness of the glass in my hand. It was just too calm. The only thing different was the ash. I had to get rid of it. I had to make sure it was gone. So I walked out back to the trash can and I tossed the thing in. As soon as it hit the bottom of the bin, the smell of cigarettes seemed to vanish from the air. But I didn't feel better. I spent the next few hours walking around my house, looking at every corner, every crack in the walls. It was like I was expecting something to jump out at me, but nothing did. Still, I couldn't sleep. It was like I was waiting for something to happen. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was just out of reach, hiding in the shadows. For the next few days, I couldn't get that smell out of my head. It was faint, but it lingered. And I didn't tell anyone about it. I didn't want to sound crazy. But that night, I changed every lock in the house. I didn't know why, but it felt like I had to. It didn't make sense. But something about that ashtray, something about the way it had filled itself, it just wasn't right. That was the last time I ever saw that ashtray. And I'll be damned if I ever have another one in the house again. Story 9. I was in college when my parents asked me to house sit for them. They were heading out of town for a few days, and being the overprotective type, they insisted I take care of the place. I never liked staying there alone. I don't know why. I guess I've always been a bit of a scaredy cat. But they needed the help, and it wasn't like I could say no. So I agreed, knowing I'd just lock myself up at night and be fine. The first night was uneventful. I did my usual routine, ate dinner, watched a little TV, and got ready for bed. I made sure to lock every door and close every window. I always did that, even when they weren't away. It just made me feel better. My dog Rex was with me. He's a big guy, part German Shepherd, part something else. I think he was supposed to make me feel safe, but at the moment, all I wanted was to be left alone in my room. I woke up around 3 a.m., a bit chilly. I'm not sure what woke me, but it was cold. Colder than usual. The blankets were twisted around my legs, and I swear I felt like something was wrong. I didn't want to get up. No part of me wanted to move. But then Rex started barking. Not just a few barks, but frantic, low, urgent barking. It wasn't like him at all. I froze, listening. I should have grabbed my phone, but I didn't want to risk making any noise. Rex was still barking like something had him spooked. He was in the hallway, just pacing back and forth, his eyes wide and his tail low. I tried calling him, but he wouldn't come to me. The barking got louder. I figured maybe someone had broken in, though it seemed impossible. My parents lived in a decent neighborhood. Nothing crazy. But the thought of someone being in the house made my skin crawl. Slowly, I got up, walked to my door, and locked it behind me, even though it had already been locked when I went to bed. I guess my instincts were telling me to be extra careful. When I stepped into the hallway, it was like the air had changed. It wasn't just cold, it was biting. You know that kind of cold that feels like it's inside you? I shivered. I saw Rex standing in front of the living room, his eyes fixed on something. He was barking at the hallway, but his stance was tense, like he was ready to pounce. I swear, I could feel something in the air too. Something was wrong. I tried calling his name again, but he wouldn't move. And then it hit me. The lights were all on. Every single light in the house. Living room, kitchen, hallway, even the one in the bathroom. The one I'd turned off before I went to bed. I swear I remembered it because it had always been a habit to turn off every light before I slept. I had even made sure to turn off the ones downstairs. That's when I heard the sound of something. Something like a door creaking. It came from my parents' bedroom. I knew it wasn't Rex because he was still barking at the hallway. My blood ran cold. I was frozen to the spot. My eyes darted from Rex to the hallway, and I swear I could feel someone watching me. I stepped back, my heart pounding in my chest. I don't know how long I stood there. It felt like forever. Then out of the corner of my eye, I saw something move. Just a blur. I turned toward it, but there was nothing there. I heard Rex growl low, his tail flicking as if he'd spotted something, but it was too fast, too quiet. I felt a chill on the back of my neck. Then I heard it again, a door unlocking, slowly. The sound of the lock clicking in place, followed by the heavy creak of the door opening. The hairs on my arms stood up, and I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. My throat was dry. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to run, but my legs felt like they were made of stone. That's when Rex started barking again, louder, more frantic. And that's when I heard it. Footsteps, soft, slow, but deliberate. Someone walking toward me down the hallway. I couldn't breathe. The footsteps stopped in front of my parents' bedroom. I could hear the floorboards creaking under their weight. I could feel the air get even colder. A sound, like a shuffling noise, echoed down the hall. My heart was hammering in my chest. The footsteps moved again, heading back toward me, toward the living room. But no one was there. Then the door at the end of the hall, the one that leads outside, opened. Just slightly. Enough for me to hear the faint sound of the wind outside. I knew then that something was wrong, that whatever was happening, it wasn't human. It wasn't anything I could explain. Rex went ballistic. He tore down the hallway toward the door, growling and barking like he was ready to fight whatever it was. I couldn't follow. I couldn't move. My legs wouldn't work. I could barely breathe. My eyes were glued to the door, the only thing between me and whatever had taken over the house. I don't know how long I stood there shaking, paralyzed with fear. I kept my eyes on that door, praying it wouldn't open again. But Rex's barking had stopped. The silence that followed was unbearable. I had to get out. But I couldn't move, not at first. Eventually, my legs unlocked and I ran to the bathroom. I grabbed my phone off the counter, but the screen was dark. I couldn't make a call. I wanted to scream, but nothing came out. I curled up in the shower with Rex, who was trembling beside me, and I stayed there until morning. I didn't sleep. I just sat there, my mind racing, wondering what had happened. When the sun came up, everything seemed normal again. The house was just as I'd left it, except all the lights were still on. Every door was open, and Rex, he wouldn't leave my side for days. Story 10. It wasn't the kind of house that made you feel at ease. It was one of those old places that just had a vibe about it, like the walls were watching you, waiting for you to slip up. I always felt it, but I didn't say much. My sister? She felt it too, though she was the one who always said something. She was the one who couldn't stand going upstairs to the attic. She locked the door when we were home alone, and I thought she was just being dramatic. But I don't know. I think she might have been right. I was 12 at the time, and it was one of those rare moments when I was home alone. It was a Saturday afternoon, the kind where everything's quiet and the house just feels empty. My parents had gone to the store, and my sister was out with her friends. I didn't have anything to do, so I figured I'd go up to the attic. There were always things to dig through, old boxes of stuff, toys I hadn't seen in years, clothes that didn't fit anymore. I was kind of curious, and honestly, I thought I'd check for anything cool to mess with. The attic stairs creaked as I walked up. It was a narrow space, just enough room for me to stand. The air was thick and cold up there, and I could smell the dust, an old musty smell that made my nose itch. I had to push aside a few things to get to the old wooden chest where we kept old blankets and random junk. It wasn't anything special, but I always liked going up there. It felt like being in my own little world. That's when I saw it. I was looking through one of the boxes when I caught a glimpse of something. It wasn't a shadow, at least not like any shadow I'd seen before. It was more like a shape, a big, bulky shape. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, or maybe just something weird with the dust floating in the air. But then it shifted. Slowly, and I mean slowly, it moved. I froze. It was like something was hiding behind a stack of old boxes, peeking out. The shape didn't seem to have any real features, just this white, translucent form. But it was shaped like a head. No, not just a head, it was big. Way too big to be a person's head. It was almost like something from a nightmare. Alien, in a way. I couldn't make out any details, just the outline of something huge and pale, staring straight at me. My heart started hammering in my chest. I don't know how long we just stared at each other. Maybe a few seconds, maybe longer. Time felt like it slowed down. It didn't make a sound, but I could feel it watching me, like it was waiting for me to move, waiting for me to make the first move. And then, it happened. It slowly, so slowly, lowered itself behind the box, as if it didn't want me to see it anymore. But I'd already seen it. I couldn't unsee it. I couldn't look away, not even when it was out of my sight. I couldn't even move. My feet felt glued to the floor, and I couldn't get my breath back. The air felt thick, like the whole attic was pressing down on me. I just stood there, wide-eyed and paralyzed, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. But the longer I stood there, the more I felt this sense of dread creeping up on me. The kind of dread that makes you want to crawl out of your skin. I don't know how long I stood there, but finally my body reacted before my brain could catch up. I turned around fast and bolted down the stairs like my life depended on it. My legs were shaking, and I don't think I even breathed until I was halfway down. I don't know what it was. I don't know if I imagined it or if it was real. I've spent years trying to convince myself that I just freaked myself out. But the way my body reacted, no way. That wasn't just in my head. I know what I saw, and I've never been back in that attic since. I didn't tell anyone at first. Not even my sister. I don't know why. I guess I was embarrassed. I mean, how do you explain that to anyone? Hey, I saw something weird and I don't know what it was. But eventually when we moved, I told her. I had to. I needed to know if she'd seen anything, or if she felt the same thing I did. She said she hadn't, but she wasn't surprised. She said she always felt like something was up there, something that didn't want anyone to be in that attic. We never talked about it much after that. Honestly, we didn't talk much about the house at all after we moved. It just felt like it was better to leave it behind. But I never felt the same after that. Not in any of the houses we lived in after. And I'll never ever go into an attic alone again. Thanks for watching. Don't leave before leaving a like to this video. Also hit the subscribe button to support my work. And as always, have a horrific nightmare, my dear.